Let's get reaction to what we've heard in this tribunal, and certainly what, from a psychological point of view, we would be observing. And for that, we're joined by clinical psychologist Dr Khosi Jiyane this evening. Dr Jiyane, good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I think without also, I suppose, throwing the bones and assuming that we know what the outcome of this tribunal would be, immediately there was the question around what actually, from a psychological and emotional point of view, is sexual abuse, sexual harassment in the workplace in and of itself can do, whether in the case of Mengo or from a general point of view. I think that's a great place to start to set the tone.
I think one of the words or terms that were used in the clip that played just now is around the objectification, the humiliation, the belittling of a woman as a human being, and seeing her only as a sexual object, which also plays into a contamination of the space of work as a place of moral and ethical, observation. And it then muddies the waters in terms of what is expected as a code of conduct in broader society, but specifically codes of conduct that exist in the workplace. It violates so many of those tenets that are key to such an environment. And it would obviously cause undue distress, not just the stress that a person may already be navigating from a work point of view and the burden of responsibility, but now an added dimension that is very subtle and yet runs very deep in terms of what it means for you to be seen in that light, as opposed to being given the respect due to you as a human being, but also in terms of your professional role within an organization.
Yeah, so important. And I immediately think of, and in the clip that we just played as well, Dr. Jiyane, Moses Kakane, while, cross-examining Mengo, also talking about the role that she may have played in their conversations. And he goes further as well in talking about that. To take a listen to this clip.
Certain chats, and some of them, yes, salacious, took place between the two of you.
Mandise ndikuxelela ke okubanga bake iclient yam ithini ke ngoku okubanga ba ewe ke ichats ezithile ewe ezinye zazo ke izichats ezinencoko ke ephathelene nezesonto ewe zenzeka phakathi kwenu nobabini.
Ewe?
Yes.
Do you agree with me now that at some point you were exchanging equally salacious messages?
Uyavumela na ke nam ngoku okubanga bake nawe ke ngokufanayo kanti ngolinganayo ke nawe wawuthumela ke imiyalezo eyayikumila kunje?
Ewe?
Yes.
You agree with me that at some point, as we will go to your statements probably tomorrow, it is you who says ndikufuna I want you lasting. Sorry, ma'am. I want you lasting so that you will be energized.
I want you, the last word?
Lasting, desiring.
Okay. Bangaba ke uyavumba lo myalezo lona ke wawusuka kuwe ke okubangaba ke ndikufuna last okanye ndiya ndikunqwenela ngokunqwenela.
Ewe?
Yes.
Yeah, of course, we do apologize for the explicit nature of that content. But Dr. Jiyane, I mean, this is really quite something that we're seeing there in what we're hearing. When we heard her at the beginning of this tribunal, I suppose, with some of her own legal representation putting the story forward, it's one thing, right? And a very emotional experience that we saw Mengo in tears a lot of the time. And now with the cross-examination, things getting particularly, I suppose, tumultuous, right? The role that you played is something that we see quite often?
Sure. I wouldn't want to say that it is something that we see quite often, but one case is one case enough. And I think, it really has turned this case on its head as such, because we had one impression at the beginning of this, and it does seem now from the footage and audio that we've just heard that there was a little bit more to it, and that she wasn't quite an innocent victim as such, more than she also was a co-participant and co-creator in the dynamics that played out between them. I guess it is then perhaps a matter of did they have different boundaries or did they have different conceptions? But it clearly does say to us, at least on the sidelines and on the face of what we've just heard now, that there was a bit more to it than it may have seemed at the beginning of the unfolding of the hearings.
Yeah, because there's also the idea, and perhaps activists would even argue that there's the idea that if you are perhaps a victim of sexual harassment, that is there a point where you might very well see in some cases, and that's why I don't want to necessarily specify this one because we don't know what the outcomes are going to be, but where you have seen cases where victims may very well seemingly play along to keep the peace?
It could be. And again, she would need to put that on the table of considerations because, again, it is unfolding as we watch, the hearings take place. At the beginning, we had one picture, and now there's been a bit more texture given to that landscape. And perhaps there will be more as she then begins to give us her side of it, if indeed she did, and what the motivation was behind it. And it again will invite us to reconsider as we go along where we think the case might be going as the picture gets expanded, more complex, and more dynamics are put on the table for our consideration.
Yeah, of course, going back to some of those clips coming out of the tribunal, Mengo was Kakano really questioning Mengo on why she failed to tell the inquiry about the inappropriate messages that she had sent.
And you've agreed with me that you were doing this in order to conceal the fact that you too send salacious messages.
Nokubanga bake oko wakwenza ke njengoba ke besivumelana kabuchilo ukubanga bake ukufihla ke imiyalezo lena nawe owawuyithumela.
Ewe.
Yes.
I want to ask you, it's a question I didn't ask you again, but we've agreed on the theory of lies and lying.
Bese sivumelene okanye sithethileke ngetheory ke yobuxoki kakunye futhi nokuxoka.
Do you agree with me that a person who's untruthful is a liar?
Uyavumelana nam okokuba ngaba ke umuntu onganyanisekanga lixoki.
Ewe.
Yes.
Do you agree with me that a person who misleads others in a panel like this is a liar?
No, uyavumelana nam okokuba ngaba ke umuntu okhohlisa ke abanye ke ne panel ke njengalena uba ngaba lixoki.
Ewe.
Yes.
Well, Mengo concedes that she never told Mbenenge about his messages, that his messages made her uncomfortable.
I was getting tired of his questions and getting uncomfortable, and I responded by saying I will give him a chance for him to observe.
Lapha ke ifundeka ngohlobo okokuba ngaba ke ndandithiya ke ngokundithiya didinwa imibuzo yakhe kaye futhi ke ingandiphathi kakuhle ndaphendula ke ngokuthi ndiza kumnika ithuba lokuba ngaba ke azibonele.
Ewe ndiyayibona.
Yes, I see it.
Ms. Mengo, without undermining what you were feeling, and I heard your testimony, would I be correct to say that on the face of it, from an outsider observing, outside you did not communicate this discomfort?
Xa ndinothi ke ngondithi kuwe hayi wena kodwa ke ongomnye ke umuntu ke ongaphandle ke ojonge ukuba ngaba ke indlela owawuziva ngayo kanye ke imvakalelo le yakho mayelana lomba lona ayonto owaye wayigqithisa.
Ewe.
Yes.
You will agree with me that for whatever reason, and I don't want to question your reason, for whatever reason, how you feel is not communicated when you don't say it.
Indlela oziva ngayo ayigqithisekanga okanye ke ayithethekanga xa wena ungayikhuphi okanye ke ungayitsho.
Ewe.
Yes.
Yeah, Dr. Jiyane is still here with us. And of course, then if we listen to the two clips that we just played there, Dr. Jiyane, I immediately think about the sort of accountability that is expected of said victim in a matter like this. You did not tell him to stop, accountability being asked for there. And do you concede that you understand what dishonesty is? And I'm thinking about, from a psychological point of view, where you are sitting on that podium, just how much you must be struggling with then if you are truly of the belief that you were sexually harassed when all of these questions are being thrown at you?
Yeah, I guess it does tend to attenuate the picture somewhat. It moves us from seeing this as a purely predatory advance on his side, on an otherwise innocent, unsuspecting, person who had engaged with him on a very innocent basis, and he had himself muddied the waters by shifting the goalposts or shifting the parameters of their relationship towards one that becomes sexualized. But we do get that there was a lot more sexual innuendos on both sides, reciprocal innuendos that were going on. So what it would bring to mind for me is the question of why would she have done so in the beginning and not have pulled back much earlier? Because from the things that she is alleged to have said at this stage, from what we've just heard in the audios that you've played, there was quite a considerable amount of sexual innuendos that were going back and forth between them. And then it makes you wonder, did she bite more than she could chew? And was she in so deep that she didn't know how to backtrack out of it in a manner that couldn't have negative consequences for her, given perhaps the relationship that they already had up front? It raises a lot of questions, and I must say I am at a disadvantage in the sense that I haven't followed it sequentially, but just talking from the bites that we've had access to in this interview, it does certainly raise a lot more questions and about the role that and accountability that she also needs to take for her role, and that there's a different impression that's beginning to emerge at this stage of her being a co-participant and co-creator of the dynamic that played out between them, as opposed to a predator and a prey as such.
Yeah.
At least at this stage, without preempting what could potentially also follow and invite us to reconsider this position as well.
100%, and that needs to be reiterated, that as things develop, of course, really things may very well shift as we see the tribunal continue. I think final one, though, Dr. Jiyane, just from a general point of view, your views on how psychologically we provide support across the board, really, for victims of sexual harassment, and especially with what they might very well face in a courtroom or a legal procedure. I think immediately about Cheryl Zondi, for instance, many years ago, going through very tough sort of cross-examination, people thinking, how on earth is she, able to do this? And certainly not once only was it that she was able to endure. Is there a sufficient psychological support for a victim going into a process like this?
Well, I would hope that by the time they themselves enlist the services of legal counsel, of attorneys, or whatever form of legal support that they bring on board to help them take this case on and put it in the space that it is in at the moment, that they would have had to go through some form of preparation for the interrogation that will follow, and the detail to which they will have to render themselves vulnerable and open to scrutiny, in as much as the intent is to put the other person or the alleged perpetrator to scrutiny, that they themselves will also be subjected to the same, if not more, from a defensive posture in defending the alleged perpetrator. And I think also, though, that there's an extent to which you can sort of be prepared, informed about what's to come. And yet when reality plays out, it will always kind of cut quite deeply into that process when that moment actually happens. And it is one that would need, some sort of support preparation before and a debriefing afterwards, but it is not one that you will never come out of unscathed if you're going to take things to that extent. And I guess this is part of why people become reluctant to come forward, because at some point the tables turn where you may feel that as the victim, you then are put on the stand as though you are the perpetrator, and the tables have turned on you. And you need the kind of psychological and emotional strength to bear up, the process and to take it to its logical conclusion. It's a big ask, but I guess it is one where a person would say, I've already lost, or I've already paid so much. I might as well pay the full price and go all the way. Because, as the saying goes, all it takes for evil to thrive is for good people to say nothing and do nothing. Yeah. And many a times perpetrators rely on people fearing this level of exposure, this level of scrutiny, and therefore, kind of letting things die quietly, or even get to the next level where they do get preyed on sexually and otherwise, and yet feel too ashamed of the stigma and the interrogation to stand up for themselves.
Yeah. A complex matter, truly, truly, truly. But Dr. Jiyane, we really do appreciate your time this evening. Of course, the tribunal continues and we'll be keeping you updated as well. Dr. Khosi Jiyane is a clinical psychologist.